Greetings once again, space travelers. Welcome home. You've just tuned your dial to Spaced Out Radio, the only place where you can own the night. I am your host, Mr. Rob G, and tonight we're broadcasting to you on our terrestrial affiliates across North America and digitally on TalkStream Live, KPNL, and Odyssey Radio. Remember, you can access our archives for free at youtube.com/Spaced Out Radio. And while you're there, please consider hitting that subscribe button. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Spaced Out Radio and at Spaced Out Radio Show. Our website is spacedoutradio.com, where the options are endless. You can stay up to date with the SOR Newswire, get some official Spaced Out swag, plus rock out to some Bumblefoot and so much more. Once again, we have an awesome show for you tonight that can't hold us down. We are going to get through this wonderful weekend that we've been having so far with After Hours. Yesterday, we had a great guest, Deb Shakti. Tonight, we have a great guest as well, Suzy Hansen. We're going to be getting into a lot of different topics. She wears so many different hats, and can't wait to go ahead and talk to her. We're going to actually go ahead and do that right now. I just want to tell everybody thank you for your patience, and thank you for rejoining us back here at Spaced Out Radio After Hours. Without further delay, let's go ahead and bring in our guest of the night, the ever so patient, ever so lovely Suzy Hansen. Ladies and gentlemen, let me just stop and give Suzy Hansen a round of applause here, please.
Thank you, Rob, and everybody.
Yes. I mean, we had to do it. I definitely appreciate your patience. I appreciate you getting back with us here. And I know we were right in the middle of getting your story. So if you wouldn't mind, let's go ahead and start right about where you had this sighting at about 20 years old. And we can go ahead and pick it up from there.
Okay, so I had this phenomenal sighting and experience when I was 20. And I can outline that a bit later if you like. But this particular experience kind of wrenched me into the reality that something was strange was happening to me. And that's the age that I started talking to people about their experiences and starting to document them, more their sightings than their experiences, because it wasn't until a few years later that some New Zealanders started owning up to the fact that they were having some kind of contact. We really, in those days in New Zealand, didn't know how to give it a name. So from there, I went on and worked with a number of veteran UFO researchers in New Zealand. They were all men except for one. And I worked with some of those researchers for a number of years, kind of learnt the ropes. And then in 2000, I decided that they were all kind of compartmentalized. So, covering different areas of New Zealand, but there was no actual national database or national investigation and research group. So that's what I formed in the year 2000. And I brought some aviators on board, and we used to nickname them the credibility factors, because when the pilots and air traffic controllers talked to the media on our behalf, they tended to listen, simply because of their standing in aviation and the community. And so I've got websites, and from there I went on to a lot of speaking overseas. Wrote my book in 2014, which went out in 2015. And at this point, after COVID, there's not so many conferences all being organised, and because I live way down at the bottom of the planet, not many people are willing to pay my fare anywhere. So I've got into other background things. So I'm working with experiencers who are writing books. I'm mentoring a lot of them through their experiences coming to the surface and their flashbacks, especially the younger ones. And I've also on a founding member and New Zealand representative, and on the executive of ISA, which is the International Coalition for Extraterrestrial Research. And that has scientists, academics, and long-time researchers like myself. Next March, I'll have been in this for 50 years, so I'm showing my age a bit. But it's been a really great thing to have been in. It's had its ups and downs. I've been threatened, and I've had an attempt on my life. There's been all sorts of things happen. So, it's been a very interesting ride along the way. In 2010, I lobbied the Chief of Defence in New Zealand for the release of the New Zealand MOD files. So that was another little thing that we can chalk up to our small organisation. We have a massive archive of sightings in New Zealand. We don't know why they have been so prominent here over the decades. Another reason might be that some of the older researchers who've now passed on were ex-Air Force. So everything was very well documented and very carefully examined. So that's pretty much a rundown of where I'm at the moment.
That is awesome. I'm just looking at you can really look at this and consider this a list of accomplishments, and just so many different hats that you've worn in over the time to get to try to push the narrative. I mean, I love the work that you have done and that you continue to do. And just looking at this, so what I'd like to do, because we can go so many different places. I do want to start and kind of go in chronological order. So if we could start with the sighting that you had when you were 20, because I'll tell you, it says that your worldview was shaken in 1975 at age 20. Car was engulfed and lifted off the road. So if you wouldn't mind going into that, I think that could kind of get a baseline where we go from there.
Okay, well, a flatmate and I had decided to go and visit some friends on 2 different farms. There were big sheep stations in New Zealand, and we had family friends there, so off we went for the day. And he had arranged to pick me up at about 4 o'clock, 4:30 on a lovely sunny autumn day. So when he picked me up from a farm I was visiting, he said, we're going to go back to the city of Hastings, where we were living, by one of the back roads, by the back highway that goes through the farms and the hills. And for some reason, be it a premonition or something, I don't know, but my stomach lurched when he said that. So we weren't going to go on the main road through a lot of small country towns. We were going to be on an isolated road. So off we went, and, looking over the paddocks was sunny and beautiful. And, we were quite relaxed and talking. At some stage, we saw ahead of us over the hills a very two very bright lights. And we assumed they were the lights, landing lights of a agricultural aircraft coming into land on a farm. They appeared to go out, which also made sense because if the aircraft had turned and banked, then we wouldn't see the lights anymore. But then the next minute they appeared right next to us on above the adjacent hills. So that was a real shock. So you can imagine we were suddenly thrown into animated conversation about what it could be. They disappeared. They appeared further along the line of hills again. By this time, we had been slowly coming down out of the hills onto a long straight that was about 2.5 kilometres long. So we came to a stop at the beginning of that straight and watched to see what would happen next. And they disappeared or flicked off and didn't come on anywhere else. So we thought, oh, well, we don't know what that was. So we carried on. We'd only gone a couple of 100 metres or so. And my flatmate said, whatever it is, it's coming up behind us. And my window was down. I stuck my head out the window to have a look. And there was this massive elliptical bright white light, wider than a road, speeding up behind us. It was so bright you could barely look at it. Within seconds, it was over the car. I could no longer see anything, no road, no paddocks, nothing. Just this bright silvery light seemed to fill the car. I managed to somehow turn my head towards my flatmate because everything seemed to have slowed down into slow motion. And he had his head against the door jamb. His hands had dropped onto his knees, so he was no longer driving. And there was this astonishingly loud, graunching mechanical sound. We often say that UFOs are quiet or silent or just make a humming sound, but that's not always the case. So the last thing I remember is trying to shut the window, somehow thinking that might save me from something. And I don't remember ever completing that task because I must have passed out. The next thing I knew was feeling like I'd just woken up and not knowing where I was. And there was this loud cracking sound. And I could feel the car floating. And just before I passed out, I'd felt it leave the ground like an aircraft leaving the tarmac. So I felt it floating, it hit the ground, the car lights came on, the engine started, and we were at the far end of the straight negotiating. My flatmate was trying to negotiate going over a one-way bridge, which was very close to us, coming up. And the most extraordinary thing was that it was dark. It was no longer sunny. It was completely dark. We argued for about half an hour or more about what had happened, why it was dark. And the shock and trauma of this experience was so great that we felt sick, we were thirsty, our hands palms were sweating. So we had all these shock and trauma implications. And when we got back to our flat, the rest of our flatmates said, well, where have you been? And we were 90 minutes late from the time that we should have been there. So that was a pretty phenomenal experience. And I guess that really catapulted me into looking at these kinds of experiences and discovering other people who were having these kinds of experiences, trying to make sense of it. My flatmate couldn't accept it. He was a scientist. He had no scientific explanation for it. So in his mind, he tried to create the understanding that it didn't happen or it had a simple explanation. It must have a simple explanation. But of course, the big elephant in the room was the fact that 1 minute it was sunny and the next it was dark.
Yeah. I mean, and it's just, I was laughing on the inside, said the scientists just trying to explain it away as something rational when there's nothing rational about what you just mentioned here. So I guess, and this happened in the 70s. So obviously this is the stigma is thick as ever back then. I know you said you went to search out other groups, and I'm sure this is where your whole intrigue into this probably started. Was this something that you were able to, especially with the person you were with, kind of said, "Hey, I don't know what that was." Did you have a problem talking about this with like friends, close friends, and family, or did you even try to? Because I know the
No,
stigma is pretty thick.
I didn't even try to. How do you put something like that into words? I remember one of our flatmates coming into my room, my bedroom. One of the girls came in to talk to me and said, "Well, what the hell is going on?" Because it was quite clear that the other flatmate and I didn't like each other by then because we had such varying ideas of what it could be. Because of my 8-year-old sighting of a UFO with my family, it was in my reality. And I just said it was a UFO, and he said, "Those don't exist. You're crazy." So, he didn't want to even look at it. I didn't talk to anyone about it. I just said that this strange thing had happened, and we don't know what happened. We don't know
Hmm.
what happened in this period of time to the girl who came into my room. But I didn't talk to anyone else about it. Several years later, I told my mother. She kind of was interested. I came from a long line of psychic people on her side of the family, so she certainly didn't, wasn't didn't deride the experience. But I didn't. I kept very quiet about it for a long time until I noticed other things happening during the late 70s in the area where I was then teaching, and I was married by then, and I hadn't told my former husband. And I had some more experiences of this kind at that time. And that's when I started to get in touch with one or two other people. But really, it wasn't until years later in New Zealand that people started to come forward. And that was largely due to the work of a lady called Daisy Kirkby, who's a very good friend of mine. She's in her 80s now. She started a group in Auckland for people who were having experiences like this, and she introduced me to a few people. But there were no books on the subject in New Zealand in those days. It was a long time before Dr. Dr. Max and Jacobs and others, Whitley Strieber's, etc., came into New Zealand. So there was no point of reference for those of us who were examining these experiences. We just really were on our own for a long time.
Wow. And yeah, when you put that into perspective, because obviously internet's not available. So if you don't have keynote speakers that are in your country, then yeah, I guess it is kind of hard to even begin to have the conversation. And then eventually people came and you were able to talk about it. Now, what I will ask you, because obviously with the missing time, you would assume, and I'm sure you didn't think about this at that moment or back then, that maybe there was some sort of abduction that had occurred. So later down the line, did you readdress this? Did you look into like regression or some sort of to something to try to pull the memories out for that?
Well, I think just to start with, for people in America in particular, you've got to realise that in New Zealand, when this first happened to me in 1975, there were only 2.5 million people in New Zealand. That
Mm,
was our entire population.
wow.
Um, so it was a case of everyone knows everyone, and you couldn't talk about these things openly because you didn't want to go spread too far. But yeah, I think that when the events happening to me began to speed up in my late 20s and early 30s, and I had children. That's when I really started wanting to get some answers. And I began to remember a lot of my experiences. At first, it was just snippets. At first, it was nothing, just missing time. Then it was snippets of memories. And then a particular catalyst experience happened where I came to out of what I call the altered state, and I was standing in my hallway of my house with 3 greys and my son, one of my sons. And I must have slipped out of the altered state they had put me in to transport us because I became aware of the telepathy passing between the 3 greys. and I responded to it. And in that moment, they realized that I was out of the state and I wasn't scared of them. And one said to another, the other two, it's time for her to remember more. And from that time on, I did begin to remember more whole experiences with a great deal of detail, which I now talk about in my speeches to do with alien technology. That's got me into a lot of trouble. But, you know, this has been an unfolding process. I had some researchers at the time in the late 90s and early 2000s trying to get me to do regressions, mainly because some of them wanted to use my information in speeches, etc. But I decided that I didn't want to do that. There was a lot of cloudy thoughts around regressions at that time, even though Dr. John Mack had done them. And so I decided I would just go with my memories. And I think it was about 20 years that I went with just my memories and documented it, documented what had happened to me and what I recall. When I first started speaking about my experiences, I'd had no regressions. And that's a good thing because I still have a copy of my first speech at an international conference in New Zealand in 1997, in which I described some of the technology I had seen. And that technology, some 15 to 20 years later, appeared in our technology. Now, there's no way I could have known about that way back then, living down here in New Zealand with 2.5 million people. So, this is the corroboration that I talk about in my speeches that is very important to seek out amongst other experiencers, because it gives us some kind of evidence. Now, I've had a lot of skeptics say that's not evidence at all. But, what kind of evidence can an experiencer offer apart from being able to find other people who've seen exactly the same piece of technology and can describe how it works also? So there is, to me, that is evidence of some kind. It would be accepted in courts. So, why isn't it accepted in our subject?
No, you're totally right. And that's kind of that. I mean, exactly what you said is kind of how I go about. I mention it as a puzzle that we all have to put together. And the way that you do that is by having the conversation with other experiencers and then kind of cross-referencing data points in order to paint the picture. And then, the skeptic is obviously going to want hardcore proof, but they're not really in the conversation. It's more for what you talked about, talking to other experiencers, because within yourself that there's certain things that can only be validated by someone who saw or had the same sort of experience that you had. So, yeah.
I find it quite intriguing, Rob, that despite several of us talking about technology, experiencers, probably me and maybe a few others talking about this kind of technology in detail, that I'm fortunate in that I've had a lot of scientists approach me and talk to me about it and have offered me information that's been really helpful, and some of that will be in the second book that I'm writing. But by and large, not a lot of scientists talk to experiencers. There are some, but and I can see that it is beginning to happen now. A lot of more scientists have holding conferences, etc. But they're talking about consciousness and that, but they're not really talking to experiencers about how they have experienced consciousness. Now, there's an experiencer in Canada who's putting out a revised edition of his book soon. It's going to be launched early next month. And he's much younger than me, but we have a significant amount of information that corroborates each other's. He has come across that technology in different circumstances to me, but it is identical. Or I consider it to be a slightly more advanced version of the one that I saw decades ago, but still has the same characteristics. So really, I think that there's going to be, in the current atmosphere that's happening at the moment in the UFO field, I think there's going to be a lot of time wasting actually with a lot of conferences happening where scientists and academics talk about all kinds of things, but sooner or later they're going to realize that what is missing is the experiential angle to it all. And that is where I am hoping, anyway, that they will come back to people like myself and others who are able to offer quite considerable pure memory of those kinds of experiences.
Yeah, I mean, and it's so important. I mean, the experience or part of it is the whole thing. I mean, because and we've talked about that on this channel with Dave Scott, and just about how it seems like they are purposely sidestepping experiencers, like they don't want that. They made it pretty clear in the beginning where they tried to paint the narrative that the experiencer, the average person's experience doesn't like matter almost to the overall conversation. I'm like, how could that be? Because these are firsthand encounters in a lot of cases. We're talking about abductions. We're talking about being able to explain and identify certain craft, like in your case, where you were exposed to a specific type of technology that I'm sure would help them. But then I guess their view is that you have some people out there that could be making up some details, and I think that's why they sidestep the experiencers. But that's not an excuse, because the way I look at it is everyone's data is important, and let's put it all on the table, and the scientists should be taking the same approach too. Let's look at all this and then kind of parse out the stuff that doesn't add up, like at least vet it and then say that the opinion doesn't matter. But to completely sidestep experiencers without even looking or listening to any of the information, I think is an injustice. So are you then, with that being said, it's pretty evident that the scientific method and which they're working lock and step with governments all over the globe, and my view is that these governments and powers that be don't want to ever confirm any of this stuff anyways. With all the information that they do get, they don't want to confirm it. How do you feel about that? Did you waste any time uh hoping or thinking that the scientists and the government will get this thing figured out? Or are you more of a, this is in the hands of humanity and the experiencers completely to get this validated?
Actually, I think that there's a vested interest in keeping experiencers quiet, because after I had spoken about alien technology at the 2018 Congress, there was an attempt on my life. And I came back to New Zealand and nearly died because I'd been sprayed with a cocktail of lung bugs, and I was very ill. So I think that there are groups or corporations who have a vested interest in the public not really knowing just how much they know about alien technology. Now, we hear through news media and all sorts of other sources within the UFO field, including investigative journalists, that people in corporations have got bits of craft and has been back engineered craft and has been downed craft that have been retrieved, etc. And there's such a jumble of information about that. We really don't know what has really happened. There are claims made by people like David Grush, etc. But what I believe is that they really don't want experiencers talking about this kind of stuff, because the information that I gave in my speech and have continued to give is that there must have been some back engineering, because although we don't know and don't understand the physics that these ETs have, that these visitors to the planet have, and we can't match it. So there is a certain amount of reluctance by governments, particularly in America, to admit that. But also, I think that if people like me did too much talking about the technology, it would become evident to people that it has been back engineered, and someone is probably making a lot of money out of it. And I think of the vein viewer a piece of technology that we have introduced into hospitals, etc. And I'm not saying that whoever invented it didn't invent it, but I have seen, and Steve Boucher, an experiencer in Canada, have seen exactly that technology decades ago on a craft that can look into the body and see veins or bones or whatever. And our technology at the moment has been able to develop that we can see the veins, but it's by using a slightly different method, obviously, to what the ETs use. So it's almost like technology is coming out in our civilization that is kind of a rough copycat of what experiencers have been talking about or have seen. That would indicate to me, if they're not listening to us, that they've got that information from somewhere else, and probably from a craft that's been retrieved. So, so I think there's a lot of unraveling to do yet, and it may take a long time. So we've got this whole disclosure process going on, and in my mind, it is an unfolding process. And I personally think that anyone who thinks it's going to happen anytime soon is going to be disappointed. So I think there's going to be roadblocks, and then the roadblock might be lifted by one group and it'll be put back by another, and this is going to go on and on. But as an experiencer, I always consider what I've been told by the ETs. And in my book, I have a chapter called Disclosure of a Different Kind, where I was taken to an undersea base with hundreds of other humans, and we were lectured to by an ET and a human. And there were other humans down there in the chain of command. So this was a joint process. And we were told that, this whole disclosure thing, and this was, decades ago in the 80s, is going to be like a rubber band. So they use that analogy. So some days it's going to stretch right out nice and long, and we're going to think disclosure is going to happen any minute, and then it'll bounce back. And then next time it might pull out only so far, and it'll bounce back. So a lot of this also has to do with the development of spirituality and awareness on the planet. The ETs also pushed home, the Greys pushed home the concept that we aren't going anywhere anytime soon unless we can all wake up and become more spiritually aware. By spiritually aware, I really mean compassionately aware. Compassion for our environment, for our fellow man, for our companion species on the planet, and that includes animals and all of the creatures plus the plant world as well. Because without all of that, we're not going to survive. And until we realize that, we're on a downward slope as far as I'm concerned. And people say to me, that's really negative, how can you say that? Well, I can say it because it's staring me in the face, and it's probably staring everybody in the face. Some people will look at it and register it. Some people will try to do something about it, and some people will cover their eyes and walk away. And that's where we're at today. And we have to change that, and we have to change it quite quickly, because I personally think that we're running out of time. And if I put on my UFO researcher investigator hat instead of my experiencer one, then I can see that the number of sightings being reported is really diminishing. We're in a very, very quiet time worldwide at the moment. And in my belief, we're being really closely observed now. We have got some dangerous war situations happening worldwide. We've got an ever difficult weather patterns to work with. We've got a changing climate, and we've got food shortages and scarcity. We've got homeless people everywhere, and that includes great hordes of people crossing from one country to another with nowhere to go and no hope. So we're being observed because we have to do something about this, and we have to do it quickly. And so, I hold out hope because I have been shown that we will pull through, but I think we're going to have to be realistic and realize that from where we are now, we're going to have a very rough time for a while.
Yeah, true. And you mentioned something a moment ago about, just want to clarify, you kind of alluded to running out of time. So, I mean, in the general sense, if I were to just want to figure out what that meant, I would think running out of time could just apply to simply the way that we're living right now, and then being on the brink of war and potentially World War III and maybe some nuclear activity. So running out of time for me, I would go down that path. Is that what you're referring to, or is there other information that you may be privy to that like we're really running out of time as far as the ETs go?
Well, all of those things, Rob, that you've said, all of the above, tick all of those. But back in the 90s, I was shown, early 90s, I was with a large group of humans, and we were shown, we were in an auditorium type room, and we were shown on a very large screen. We were told to prepare ourselves that what we were going to see would be shocking. And well, how do you prepare yourself except to take a few deep breaths and try to be calm? And up on the screen, maybe one every 5, 6, or 7 seconds would come a scene of some kind of destruction, as we would see with a tsunami or an earthquake or flooding or something like that. And they were pretty sad scenes. And then they began to speed them up into what I refer to as quick time, which is how you are often shown things on a craft, because you are taught from early childhood to tap or key into the frequency of the picture, not all the details on it, just the frequency that it gives off. So they began to speed these images up until there were several every 1 second. You had several pictures, and it was too much to absorb visually. It became a blur visually, but energetically, we were picking up the frequency of what it was, of great sorrow, destruction, and all of those kinds of words that we can apply to it. So the auditorium of 250 people ended up sobbing in tears, and then one of the greys came forward once the images stopped on the screen, and he telepathically put out what I call like a blanket of calm. So they have immense abilities with their mind and consciousness. And he just kind of threw this consciousness blanket over us and asked us to calm down and to be able to discuss now, telepathically with him, discuss what we had seen while being not attached emotionally to what we had seen, but to discuss the ramifications and the implications for humanity of what we had seen. So what we were shown, we were told, would happen in the future in one way or another. But the intensity of it, and this is the very interesting thing for me, the intensity of that, what would happen, would be aligned to or connected to the amount of awareness and spirituality that had developed on the planet in the interim, in those decades in between. That's what they were really looking for. And I think there's been, a lot of movement in that direction, but I don't think there's been enough when we look at what we're doing to the environment and the wars that have carried on. That's really dragged us down. So what he was implying was that our consciousness, the mass consciousness, can affect the planet. That's the way I read it. I could be wrong, but that's at the time, that's how I read it, that this rise of awareness and rise of spirituality would be the thing that would assist us, not save us, but assist us. And in my book, I also talk about the 3 waves of souls coming into the planet during the last 100 or over 100 years. And they play a part also in this whole thing, because the 3rd wave, who are now in their 30s and up to mid-40s, they are the ones who are going to take us forward and start taking lead roles, start being in positions of power and influence worldwide. We're seeing a lot more young leaders in our world at present. And some of those, not all, but they will take us into a different future. And unfortunately, some calamities in terms of earth changes and severe weather is going to be a part of that. And that's not all caused by mass consciousness. Of course, we have the influence of the cycles that are happening on the sun and many other things, all making a very complicated mix, which we as a civilization have to try to sort out.
All right. Yeah, man. And I'll ask you this. I mean, obviously you're a researcher, so I'm sure you have come across a billion different examples of things that I might bring up here, but um I would would want to know, what is your perspective on the the claims that have been recently made publicly by I believe it is Admiral Tim Gallaudet about a month ago, states uh, comes out and says, "Hey, yeah, our government is directly interfacing and talking to these extraterrestrials." Do you think that's a thing, or do you? What do you believe about that?
Well, I was fortunate, or I was able to be in a small group of people um, some months ago who talked with one of the former agency guys who's prominent at the moment, and I won't name him. And he said, we know who the residents are, meaning those that live underground, ETs that live underground, and we've met them. He said, we know who the visitors are, and we've met them. And I would take the visitors as being the greys and their associated species that they work with. And he said, but we don't know, there are these others that we call the others, and we don't know who they are. And I sort of pricked my ears up when I heard this because of course, as an experiencer, and many, many other experiencers can describe the same of being on a craft or in a undersea or underground base with the ETs and having seen humans there as part of the chain of command. That they are being taught things, they're being shown things, they're part of the planning structure. So I believe as an experiencer that at least some sector or some large group or organization of humans has been working with the ETs to slowly bring around a disclosure and an expanded awareness of our neighbours in the cosmos. But it doesn't mean to say that all of those who are going public belong to that group. So this is where the waters become very muddy. And it's very difficult to discern what is fact and what is not fact. So, I think we're going to see a lot of information coming out, and we're going to have a great deal of difficulty discerning it. It's like when I look at some of my colleagues in the field, I see people, a piece of news comes out and they're all running, looking at that, reading that. They're all interested in that. And the next day something else comes out and they're all running in this direction. And as an experiencer and a UFO sighting researcher, I prefer to stand back and observe and listen. Because I think when we go quiet and we observe and listen and don't rush making too many big statements, then we perceive a lot more.
Yeah, I totally agree with you on that. I have a separate show in besides after hours. I have another channel, and it's what I stood on was kind of sitting back as news comes in, even though it's huge news in the moment. A lot of people get so excited and just kind of want to jump into it and sign up and say, "Oh yes, I believe that." And I was more of the I wasn't really worried about being the first to talk about it, because I believe it's more important for you to kind of sit back, absorb the information, mull it over for a few days, and then maybe start addressing it at that point. So I'm glad you brought that up. But kind of going back real quick to the possibility that these ETs are actually, or have at some point actually communicated directly with government or powers that be. Do you think that they are? What do you think is? Do you think the message that they would be getting the powers that be, from ETs, is it the same message that you would have been shown in that auditorium where they're just trying to alert us of some sort of catastrophic thing that may take place on this earth if we don't stop? Is the message still the same for them, or do you think they're like the conversation is more detailed with the government, or do you think they're just getting the same thing that experiencers get when we sit down and they show us things?
I'm not too sure on that one, actually, Rob. I think it's become very complex, and I think it's very multi-leveled. But it's interesting to note that that's how the ETs operate. They have multi-leveled programs. Everything has multiple purposes and meanings. And I think at some stage, some governments in the world, maybe the US and a couple of others, have wanted to have some ownership of the subject. Because if you have ownership of the subject and you keep people guessing, you keep people interested, and you keep people hanging on, you keep people listening to what you do drop little crumbs of, and also that gives you power. It also helps you in that you don't have to disclose whether you've got back engineered craft or whether corporations are making a lot of money out of ET stuff. And if that is the case, and I'm not saying it is, but if it is the case, then I wonder why would the ETs want to talk to people like that? But maybe there have been some warnings, because I notice over the years, over say the last 20 years, the warnings about the degradation of our environment, it was like, oh, it's 14 years away before we have to worry. And then it was like 10 years away. And then it's like, we have to do it now. So there is now this urgency that wasn't there before. Has that urgency come just simply because we're having more difficult weather to deal with and a lot of earth changes? Or have we had warning of something? Yeah. And are we scurrying but finding it just too late and going round in circles chasing our tail, not knowing what to do? I know that years ago I had an experience where I was on a craft with greys, and I was in what I called a discussion group where greys would sit around with you and actually find out a bit about you and what you do. That's just part of their being able to interact and understand us better. And we might say, well, they're far in advance of us preparing to meet us halfway than we are with them. So I expressed an interest in space because I'm no astronomer, but I have always been interested in it. And so one of them said, come with me, I'll show you something. And he took me up this spiral into what I think was near the top of the craft. And this room was a holographic room. It could produce these amazing holograms. And he brought up a hologram of the planet, quite large. And he said now he had this amazing screen, which I called the galaxy screen because I didn't know what else to call it, where he could touch anywhere on the grid of our galaxy, and he could bring up things that are in that area, planets, etc., moons or whatever. So he brought up Earth, and he said that, but this technology has another capacity, which you'll find your mind will be stretched by, and that is we can be time specific. And so he took it back to the time of the Hiroshima and Nagasaki atomic bombs when they were dropped on those Japanese cities. And he asked me to brace myself. And, you know, I had heard about this, I'd read about it, I'd seen documentaries about it. I didn't realize the impact it would have on me when he showed me this hologram. So here's the planet Earth hanging in the air. And so the explosion takes place, which was animated, if you can put it that way, on the hologram by an explosion. And then he said, now watch the destruction from that. And he just kept making the hologram smaller, making the planet smaller and smaller. But the effect of that, the flow on of those explosions carried on out and out and out into space. So explosions and planets and suns destroying themselves and blowing up are happening out in space all the time.
Mm-hmm.
But what he was showing me was that this would go out into our solar system, and as it went out, the hologram of it was getting wider and bigger and more unstable, like this. It was fluctuating, and that was quite horrifying. That not only to know the destruction it created for people and on this planet, people involved in it, but that it could also harm other aspects of our cosmic neighbors and our own solar system.
Yeah.
And this was in the days before we had the technological know-how with cameras to capture the shock waves from explosions. It was a long time later that we were able to first capture those and see the impact that they had, and that the impact they have on soldiers, etc., in war. What we might know as, where people's whole nervous system is completely wrecked by explosions around them. So that was an interesting thing. So really, and they told me that at that time, he told me that they had contacted governments on the planet. So there's the word from the ET that they have contacted people on the planet and expressed concern. That same statement has cropped up a lot of times over the years in ufology by a lot of different speakers and writers and authors have said the same thing. As to whether it's true or not, I don't know, but I would imagine that was the first insight they saw, that we had crossed a line and that we were now dangerous, because we were mainly dangerous to ourselves and our fellow man. But if we wreck the planet, it's also going to carry on out into space and affect maybe other civilizations.
Yeah, and I had a few perspectives on that, because obviously, I mean, just like you stated, we don't know a lot of this stuff for sure. We're just kind of going, spitballing as we go. And the whole theory of when the bomb was dropped in Hiroshima, I mean, if you think about one thing I say is, common sense will probably get us through a lot of this stuff that we're trying to figure out. And yeah, I mean, if something were to blow up, same thing as if you were to think of a earthquake in the ocean, right? It's the source of energy, and it spreads out in all different directions, creates a tsunami 1,000 miles away. And that could very well be the same scenario that we're experiencing here. Now,
I'll give you an example there. I don't know if you heard about it in the US, but a couple of years ago, I think it was, there was the Tongan eruption, the volcanic eruption in the Tongan Islands. Now, that's thousands of kilometres away from New Zealand, maybe 2,000 or 3,000 kilometres away. And my husband and I were out at our vegetable garden one day, and we heard this massive sound, like a massive explosion. And we thought that one of the big petrol or gas tanks in the city over by the wharf had blown up, because it was huge, and we actually physically felt the impact of that explosion. And then we rushed inside, we looked on the news and everything, and then later that evening we saw people all around Australia and New Zealand saying they had heard it and felt it, and it was the Tongan volcano erupting. That's how big the eruption was. So thousands of kilometres away, we heard it and we felt it. So, that kind of puts things into perspective.
Yeah, because and the same thing for me. I'm in California. So back, I think it was 2009, 10, 11, somewhere in there, when the Fukushima, the earthquake that caused a tsunami. So we were under tsunami alert as well, California, and we ended up getting like a wave that was maybe a few inches high, just nothing too big, but it just shows the distance that energy was able to travel. Now, one theory that I have about, because when it comes to the nukes and that whole idea that we're talking about here, that they started coming around more frequently when we started detonating these bombs, and they don't want us to do this, and they want us to find another path. I recently thought about, okay, well, what if they weren't simply sitting there attempting to usher us into this new existence with 0 point energy or whatever it is that they have. I started thinking about it. Some people have a prison planet theory on why we're here and why this is what it is. I've always thought about, okay, maybe they look at nukes and they say, okay, these are very obviously devastating, and just the radiation is very poisonous, that we not necessarily that we don't want them to destroy this planet, even though they probably don't want us to, but we don't want to let you guys out into space, because you guys are now space traveling species, and we don't want you guys bringing any of that out there. And so that my theory is, one of my theories is maybe they are actually containing us here and not allowing us to make any moves, because they know in that'd be right around the same time as the Hiroshima bomb, when we first stepped into space as humanity, and they say, whoa, okay, these guys are now coming into space. It was okay before when they were keeping this on the planet, but now they can bring this poison or this and maybe pollute other planets out there that otherwise would not be affected by us, except for the fact that we are now space travelers. So one theory I had was maybe they're keeping us here and containing us and making sure we don't leave off planet with any of the current ways that we have. Like, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I've heard that kind of theory before. I don't know, there's a lot of free will stuff comes in here, although I don't think everything is free will. I think we have to take the greater good into account when it comes to free will. I don't think they're necessarily keeping us here, but they have been trying to warn us. And they have said to groups of humans I've been in that they can try to, in the complex 3 waves that I talk about of souls who've come here to do specific things. Part of that whole idea is that the 3rd wave, they're called, the bringers of change. They're going to change things from within. So what they're trying to do is educate as many humans as possible on the craft in these programs. So you're the experiencers, or some of them anyway. And hopefully those people will engender change in a great way, become leaders in certain areas. But if we look at what the ETs have been doing, there's a lot of nuclear bases around the world where they have had UFOs come in over, and Captain Robert Salas is a good friend of mine. So I know Robert talks about the Malmstrom Air Force Base incident when they came in and shut down the Minuteman missiles. And, he's doing a lot more talking about it now. The cat is out of the bag, and he's now able to talk more freely about that and bring other witnesses with him. So I think we've had these warnings, these gentle warnings. I don't know that they can keep us on the planet. If you look at our forays into space so far, they are so tiny compared to their capabilities, that it could take a very long time before we got anything out there that might be used against other civilizations. I think we're a long way from that as a civilization. I think they're more concerned about this massive humanity we have on the planet, this huge population that we have now, and how many of them are prepared in any way to associate with or meet visitors from somewhere else, either interdimensionally or from another planet. And I often say in my speeches, I think the UFO field, people can become very insular and be very attached to certain pieces of information or their own information. And sometimes the expectation is that other people should know about that, but other people don't know about that. If you look at the UFO fraternity worldwide, it is minuscule compared to the total population of the planet. So we actually have a lot of work to do to get to the rest of humanity and get them to understand what even we know, let alone consider the idea of meeting ETs. And I have a lot of people say to me, "Oh, you're so lucky as an experiencer." And they say jokingly, "Next time they take you somewhere, can you ask them to come and pick me up, because I'd quite like to see what the craft is like." And I say to them, "Look, really, it takes years of your life to acclimatize to this. When you go on a craft, it's ordinary. You've been going there since you were a child, and when you get there, you go bang, and you're in that reality. Your whole energy field expands. You have the instant understanding of where everything is. You recognize some of the ETs. You know why you're there, etc. That's for many experiencers, not all. And but when you come back down here, you have to somehow marry that part of your life in with the rest of it. So you have to assimilate it into your life and not go crazy, or not be seen as crazy. So, it's a very difficult thing. And if experiencers have sometimes taken years or decades to assimilate this, how do we do that with a massive world population? It's not like you can click your fingers and everybody will have the understanding and the emotional and mental capacity to deal with that.
Mm-hmm. True.
There's going to be all kinds of reactions to it, and we have no way of judging which of those will be prominent, which of those will be devastating, or how many of them will actually happen. We are flying blind at the moment in terms of what's happening in the UFO field. And the main thing we can do is get into the spirituality side of life, begin to understand ourselves and our fellow man and our fellow creatures better, improve our environment. And that's how we end up being able to assimilate and understand the kinds of things that we talk about in the UFO field.
Yeah. And you brought up, I was gonna, and I'm bringing this up. You brought up spirituality, and that's kind of where I wanted to leave off. So we're about to take a break here in a couple of minutes. But one thing that has been bothering, I don't know if it's necessarily bothering me, but it has me doing a lot of thinking, because I like to, take middle of the road approach. I like to get as much data as I can to lead me left or right on each issue that we come across here related to the phenomena. And lately there's been, I bring this up because, just like we talked about scientists not wanting to take in the experiencer account, you have the same thing with the media, where the media wants to talk to, the talking heads, a couple general people, but they don't even take the step further to go into talking to the experiencers. And what's been bothering me and has me thinking is why someone like a Ross Coulthard or a Jeremy Corbell, these guys that are on the news all the time, why are they all of a sudden shifting their talking points on interviews, and now kind of bridging themselves into this phenomena having to do with spirituality, which kind of just, some people have said that, but for these guys who I don't know them to be experiencers, for them to take that approach and really be buying into that is something that has me thinking really tough. And I'll wait to get your answer on that, because what we're about to do right now is actually pause for the cause and take our first break of the night. We've been going great, and I think we're going to get through it tonight. I think it's going to be a great night. So you guys just hang on right there, and we will be back after this break with our guest Suzy Hansen as we talk about why spirituality. Hang right there. We'll be right back. All right, everybody. Thanks for coming back to us. Welcome back to Space Out Radio after hour number 2 with me, your host, Mr. Rob G. And we are about to continue with our guest here tonight, Suzy Hansen, and jump into just the questions about spirituality. I kind of wanted to go into this, Suzy, because it's not, I talk to experiencers a lot. I talk to people specialize in certain things within ufology, but you bring a lot of experience. Over 48 years in the field. You have been featured on all sorts of mainstream television programs. So you've done boots on the ground research and vetting and things of that nature. So over the time that you watched this whole topic evolve back from when you had your sighting at 20, when no one was around to listen up until what we have today, based on that progression that you saw over the time, and then now in this moment today, we have people who may not even be experiencers kind of shifting their conversation to there being some spiritual thing behind what we may not know about the ETs being here. What do you put anything into that? Like, do you have any insight on why it would be considered spiritual at this point? And what are your thoughts on that?
Well, Rob, basically my entire book is about the spirituality you experience with ETs. Now, I accept that, and I know that there are experiencers who haven't, and abductees who haven't had that kind of positive experience, and I have talked to many of them in my travels overseas speaking. And I accept that, and I don't know why that is. It could be that that they have contact with a different kind of species. It could be that they don't remember things as some others do, that there's a memory thing or an experiential thing with the altered state. We all have a fear of the unknown that can also come into our reaction to being in contact with ETs. So there's a whole lot of things there, but I want to put right up front, Rob, that I know and accept that there are a lot of people who've had negative experiences. I haven't, so I can only speak from my experiential base. So everything that from a very young child, my memories of being on craft with them, right through to today, it has all been about spirituality, and the programs that they have going, educating humans and in particular many of the experiencers, they are based on this helping us to help ourselves, helping us to develop as a species and move closer to them so that there can be this contact and this interaction in the future. And many people say, oh, the greys are bad, but there's just as many who say that they're not, including myself. And what a lot of people don't understand when they go on a craft and see some greys, they don't understand that in other parts of the craft, there are other species working with them. They're not working in isolation. So there are other species and mixed species on the craft. The greys are the front people. They have particular skills. They have particular technology that is being utilized. And behind the scenes, there are other species who also have their own skills and their own technology to be utilized in this very complex range of programs as well. Now, I can give you a few examples of how I see this spirituality taking place. So as a very small child of the age of 9, they had already revealed to me at the age of 8 that, and had shown me meeting the soul of my son, who hadn't been born yet, of course, because I was only a child. So that soul was floating around out there being educated by them as a soul and being prepared to incarnate as my son. So I was introduced to the soul from a very early age. At the age of 9, I had an experience on craft where I met with 3 greys who took me into a room with this blue ball of light that I'll call the soul of my son. and they brought in a whole lot of other souls, which at that time to me looked like a lot of small coloured balloons coming into the room, little balls of light. And the whole meeting with these souls was very moving, because I was being told as a child that a lot of these souls would assist me in things I had to do in my life, and they would come into my life or cross my path at a time when that association was needed or was necessary. And at the end of this process, they took all those little souls or balls of light, left the room, and the three greys left began what I have written in my book. I called it singing because I couldn't think of any other way to describe it, but it wasn't singing as we know it. It was these angelic crystalline sounds that they emitted. Now, I've never heard any of them speak. Their mouth is usually closed when they're communicating with you because it's telepathic. But on this occasion, somehow or other, they were emitting these beautiful sounds. And at the same time, coming out of their torso was this pinkish reddish light, this glow. And at that point in time, as a 9-year-old, I realized that somehow or other I was inextricably connected to them, because out of my white pajamas that I had on came the same glow. And I hadn't any memory of seeing that before, but I responded to that glow in the same way, not with the crystalline sounds, but with the glow coming out from my torso and through my white pajamas. So this was a very spiritual happening, incident, experience, and it's not something that you can easily forget, and it was very moving. Now, the three waves that I talk about, the souls coming into the planet, many of them have had this vast experience, vast education on the craft. So the second wave, which I am in, we're the communicators. We've had a big education as a soul, then we incarnated, so we continued going on craft as a human and learned a lot of things. Our soul was also spoken to or addressed, because that has a different frequency to what we might exhibit each day as a human. And so we had this kind of spiritual upbringing, if I can put it that way. And the third wave, who are now in their 30s and 40s, they have had the most vast education on craft of all of us. And I can see that coming through now with the number of people in that age group who are coming to me saying, look, I've got all these memories coming to me. I don't know where they came from. I'm having trouble dealing with them. I don't know what it's about. I've always had some strange memories, but I never put the things together. I didn't want to investigate it. But I'm desperate, and I feel I have to get through this quickly. I have to know what this is. There's something I've got to do. And this fits absolutely identically in the box that the ETs gave me years ago as an adult, when they said, when you are older, you will start working with the third wavers. They have been the concealed ones, and we have kept them concealed on purpose. They're not out there speaking like you, but they will do. We've kept them concealed for their safety, and also to allow them to get into positions of influence, positive influence, without them being identified as some kind of freaky alien contactees. So these people are coming to people like myself now, and it's our job as the second wavers to assist them through this process, because they are the ones who are going to make the changes and help to usher in new ways of living on the planet. So here again is the spiritual input by the ETs into us as a warmongering, fickle, untrustworthy, species on this planet. They see our capabilities. They know that we have to evolve if we are to survive, and they are helping us with this. And these are all spiritual acts on their part. Now, in terms of technology, I have been saying for quite a number of years now in my speeches that and Grant Cameron actually recently published some of my stuff on his Facebook page in reference to this. And some of their technology, we couldn't use it, even if they presented it to us, because you have to be spiritual to utilize it. Now, I don't mean that to sound like elitist or anything like that. When I say spiritual, in their way of understanding, it means that you have a particular frequency. You have a frequency of compassion, and we call it spirituality. They call it compassion and awareness and understanding. And you can't use some of their technology if you don't have that frequency, because you might use it with wrong intent. Or you might develop it as something with wrong intent. And I think that's one of the things they're very upset about and are very wary of with humans, is that some of their technology may have been back engineered, downloaded, whatever, modified, and if we had more access to their technology while we have this non-spiritual attitude of every man for himself, then we are going to start weaponizing it and using it as a tool of power and using it against other humans. So we have got a long way to go with this whole frequency thing. A lot of the technology that I have used on craft and other experiencers have used is what I call, and I think I'm probably the only experiencer out there anywhere who's identified this, I call it bridging technology, because what they've done is they've taken their technology, a piece of their technology, which we might think is magic, and they've modified it to halfway. They've modified it to somewhere where they think we can cope with it. And I know this because on a number of occasions, and I've got 2 chapters catering with this in my book, on a number of occasions we've been tested with this technology. We've been given a task to do with it. And the desired outcome wasn't that you passed the, you sorted out the problem they gave you. What they really wanted to see while you were trying to solve the problem was how well you could utilize aspects of their technology to do that. So, I've got 2 whole chapters where I write about that test situation, one of those test situations. So here they are stretching us, and they're stretching us on different levels. They're stretching us to understand and utilize technology. But in order to understand and utilize it, we have to have a frequency that matches it. And so here's the spirituality side of it. I think that they want to see this planet become the place it should be, and they want us to be able to have the benefit of contact with other species. But it's a very slow process, and really those beginning steps are up to us, not up to them. Once we get up speed, then they can help us more and have more input. But until we get past the warlike tendency and every man for himself, we're not even on home base or first base yet. As Michio Kaku, the theoretical physicist, has said, there's the planetary civilization, there's a country civilization, there's a planetary civilization, then you go into the solar system, member of the solar system, and then you go beyond. Well, we're not even a planetary one yet, because we're all these little countries who are all competing with each other. So there's that level of frequency or spirituality that we have to address, and address quite quickly.
Okay, so let me ask you this then, because I know you stated that the beings that you've come across, there's been good intentions, and when I think of spirituality, on the face of it, I get things like you just mentioned here, just being positively being affected spiritually and being uplifted in that way, and that's how we would all hope that this thing goes. Now, if you had to, so if you spoke to a Corbell or a Coulthard in this moment, and all they tell you is what they're telling us, like on the news, where they say they feel like it's might be tied into spirituality, but their undertone when they're saying these things, they refer to things being somber and things. So if you had to look at, if you had to guess, because essentially is what we'd be doing here, is um, if there was a somber tone tied into the word spirituality, what could that mean? Because they don't ever elaborate on what it is that they're saying, but they do connect the two things. They make it a point to say, like, it's scary what the information that they may be holding, and then they connect it to spirituality at the same time. So if there was any negative side to a spiritual experience with these ETs, what could they, and I'm only asking because I don't think you know the answer, but with your research over time and just your mind, you may be able to give me at least something I can go on there. Like what would be the negative side to something being spiritual in relation to these beings?
Well, this is only an assumption or some guesswork and discussion on my part. But, I think if we look at religions in our world and the influence that they have had in many ways, of course, there's some positive influences, but there are just as many negative influences. And I know that there are a lot of members of some religions who are absolutely anti what I'm about and what I'm talking about, and there's the belief that I'm dealing with demons. So, and it doesn't matter how many experiences I might describe that might negate that perspective.
Mm-hmm.
It's never going to be accepted because they're totally focused on what they believe. And so I think the somber part of spirituality is that spirituality does not equate to religion, and religion does not equate to spirituality.
Yeah.
And until mankind and a large sector of mankind who have very dogmatic religious beliefs, until they realize that, then yes, there is a somber side to it, because I think that if there was the announcement tomorrow that ET's here, he's been visiting us, and they've implied this already, and they are, taking part in shaping our future along with us in conjunction with some people on this planet, experiencers, abductees, contactees. I think the somber side of it is that people like myself would be in danger. Now, I've already been in danger on a number of occasions because of my outspokenness, but I would shudder to see so many other people I know who have had experiences similar to me being treated badly. So there is many years ago, if we want to dig a bit deeper into the somber side that you brought up, is that many years ago the ETs showed a small group of humans I was with images on a screen. And now how they get these futuristic or create these futuristic images, I don't know, but perhaps with the advent of AI and suddenly into our reality, perhaps they use some form of AI. But they showed us people like myself and other experiencers actually being chased and abused and having things thrown at them for their experiences, for the fact they've come forward with them or gone public with them or talked to friends and family about them. And they said that this is a possibility in the future, and that those who have commitment to their work with the ETs and their understanding and their own experiences, those who have commitment to what it all means, what the bigger picture of all of this is for humanity, we will stand up to that. But a lot of people, and let's face it, there will always be people who join the subject, get on the bandwagon, maybe fabricate things, maybe embellish things or whatever and get some attention for it, they will fade away very quickly and disappear back into the woodwork because they will be afraid. And the numbers will get back to those who are the staunch, if I can put it that way, experiencers who understand the process, who know what humanity needs to go through from point A to point B. So there's a somber side of it. And I do know for a fact, and I'm not going to name them, but I do know for a fact that some experiencer archives by some certain researchers are being sought, is a nice way of putting it, being sought, collected, taken ownership of. And I'm not sure that that's a good thing. And why would people suddenly want to do that? So I think that there's a bit of a rocky road ahead. And for most experiencers who come to me at this point of time, I say, just keep your head down. It takes a long time to work your way through your experiences. And if you're new to it and they've just kind of come to you or whatever, just keep your head down and watch, wait, listen, because I don't think it's the right time for experiencers yet. There's some people like myself and others who are talking out. That seems to be our job for some reason or another, but why put a whole lot of other people under the spotlight who don't need to be there just yet?
I appreciate you. I appreciate you actually entertaining that, because one, and especially with the mind and experience that you have, I believe that as we have this conversation, until we get to the point to where we finally know or get actual answers to what it is that we're pondering and kind of suggesting, that we entertain all sides of this. Because the one thing that I end up seeing in ufology, and some people feel, maybe through experiences, most likely I would guess it would be the reason that some people feel like, hey, no, this is going to be just a great experience. It's going to be benevolent. These guys are here to help us. And this may be speaking to their own experience with these particular ETs. But I always say that it would be, we would leave ourselves vulnerable if we didn't think about both sides of the situation. Yeah, we hope they're here for good. We hope the outcome is enlightenment in this beautiful thing that we talk about. But then at the same time, if we hang on that and we get to the moment and then we find out that there is this other dark side to this, then we're unprepared. So I think as we have the conversation, it's definitely good to talk about both sides. So just a long way of saying I do appreciate you entertaining that part of it, because I think it's important. But kind of shifting and moving into the work that you're doing out there in New Zealand, you do contact support. So I'm assuming you have support groups out there. What is it that you do in these? So what type of services are you providing in these support groups? And what would be some, I guess, some advice that you could give if you were supporting someone like me across the globe? What would be like some tips or some of the first things that you usually recommend for someone coming into one of these support groups?
Okay, so first of all, I don't have support groups because in New Zealand, we've only just made 5 million people now. So.
Oh, okay.
And New Zealanders, like, we are pretty practical, down-to-earth people. And sometimes it's like squeezing blood out of a stone, actually getting someone to talk about their experiences. They'll say, oh, yeah, I've had some experiences, but you then start squeezing and trying to get them to talk about it. It's not quite so easy. Mm-hmm. But I have noticed more recently that I've actually been inundated with New Zealanders wanting to talk about their experiences, so that is opening up now. But because I've spoken in 8 or 9 countries now, I've come across experiences all around the place, so I get not just New Zealanders and Australians, but, people from as far away as Norway and the UK and the US and all over the place. So what I do with them is I get them to write some stuff for me first, because often writing it gives you time, rather than sitting on Zoom in front of someone you're feeling a bit nervous and you've never seen them before or whatever. I get them to write it down. It helps them to define something. So I ask for an overview, not every single detail, but an overview. And I have a look at that first so that I can understand where the person is coming from and the kind of experiences they're talking about. Then I'll respond to that, make some comments or whatever. And then I arrange to have some Zoom talks with them. I don't charge for this. I've never charged for anything that I do in the UFO field. So when people say to me, oh, you only wrote a book to make money, I get really wild about that, because I've probably given away more books than I've ever sold. Just that doesn't worry, that side doesn't worry me. I don't charge for these services. This is my job and it's my work, and that's what I do. So we'll have a talk about their experiences, and that might be broken up into quite a number of sessions, and there'll be feedback, and there might be emails that pass between us in the meantime as more stuff surfaces. But and then they'll get to a point where everything sort of suddenly makes sense, or they're more comfortable with it. And then we have intermittent contact after that, where they can email me or message me and I'll get back to them. They might ask questions, they might ask for advice on something, or just want to talk about something else that they've experienced. So that's where my work is. I also talk to a lot of experiencer groups worldwide, because there are some quite large groups in the States, Canada, UK, etc. So I talk to those groups. I'll talk to small amounts of people. I've talked to MUFON people. I've talked to researchers and other organisations. So I'm happy to do that. So really, I advise people not to rush out and go public. I think that's the wrong thing to do if you're just getting your feet on the ground. I recently saw a New Zealander came to me, talked about her experiences, and then soon after that appeared on an overseas documentary. And because another researcher had told them it would be a good idea. So, I'm quite cautious about that. I sort of feel that I like to look after people's well-being, because I've been in this a long time, and I know the pitfalls. I know the phases that you go through, backwards and forwards, in assimilating all of this. And I like to see people reach that happy spot where they're moving forward and they're living with all of this and they're learning at the same time, but they're moving forward. It's not holding them back anymore.
Yeah. And I know you had, you mentioned that you were part of a group that helped facilitate the release of UFO documents from the New Zealand Ministry of Defense back in 2010, 2011. And the way it is out here, I can only speak for America, California, just general conversations that we have, we don't get a lot of information on things that are happening in other parts of the world. So I would ask, when those documents were released, I'm assuming you were able to look through those. What was probably one of the most compelling things that you saw in those documents that the Ministry of Defense was holding?
Okay, well, we'll just go back a little bit. So I formed UFOX NZ in the year 2000, and so I'm the founding director, and I wrote to the Chief of Defence over a period of 2 years, lobbying him for the release of the files, and in the end he agreed that it was probably a good idea to do what other countries in the Commonwealth had done, Canada, Australia, and Great Britain, to release the files. But I don't think they counted on the fact that I have a massive archive of over 10,000 New Zealand UFO sightings, and I have talked to many, many witnesses. And so I knew that that the files did not contain some of the Air Force reports that they should have contained, or any reference to them at all. However, some of these MODs, they don't really want to own this subject. I think there's a lack of understanding, which is natural. It's just a step too far for a small country like New Zealand, even for Australia, which is much bigger. And so they decided that after redacting all of the documents, etc., they kept me in touch with everything along the way, which is really good. But then they decided that they would release the files on the 23rd of December. So that meant that the files were going to be released and announced on that day, which of course is like day before Christmas, 2 days before Christmas. And nobody was interested. But the media chased me up, and within those 2 days, I did 35 interviews. Wow. From overseas as well as New Zealand. But I had to say, when they said, what's in the files? I had to say, I don't know. Because, of course, it was planned so that my free complimentary copy of the files for having lobbied for 2 years did not arrive until several weeks later. And by then, of course, my air traffic controller friend who was in UFOCUS NZ with me, he's passed away now, but we sat down, we analysed the files, we went through all of the big thick booklets with a fine tooth comb and analysed them, but nobody wanted to know by then because Christmas and New Year had come and gone. If other news was in vogue, things were happening overseas, forget about the files, nobody wants to know about that. So it was very carefully staged so that we as a civilian UFO group would not be able to show them up by saying, hey, this isn't in there and that isn't in there. And most of the information that they put in about some of the very well-known New Zealand sightings, there was nothing new in there. There was just what we already know, but there must have been more that is in an intelligence file or perhaps being held because it contained people's names who'd asked for the 50-year dispensation where it doesn't get released until they've passed on. But the most interesting thing, Rob, about the files was that it contained around 90 memos from pilots, and there was only the memo. There was no investigation, no write-up by the Air Force, no investigation by the MOD, and if there was, it wasn't in the files, it's somewhere else. So if those were not investigated, that's a sad indictment on our MOD for not investigating those pilots' sightings. These are trained professionals who are on certain routes regularly. They know what they can see in the air at that time. They know what the planets like and planets look like and stars, etc., star systems. So if they report something out of the norm, someone should be listening to them. And that really spurred UFOCUS NZ on to look very closely at the military and pilot sightings in New Zealand and interview people and get them on record.
Wow, I mean, you make a great point there. So yeah, it's possible that they just did a disservice and didn't look into any of these things, or more likely, they just didn't include the information or the data that should have been there. I mean, and now at least here in America, they will redact things and pretty much redact the whole page, but they'll at least provide it to you. Out of any of the ones that you saw, because the United States is always, I call them Johnny on the spot for sightings across the world, crash retrievals and dealing with different countries. The U.S. steps in and takes over. Did you find anything in those files that related to the U.S. interfering or stepping in, or anything mentioned about the U.S. in any of those sightings? Because I know it's usually
not in the files, but having known a lot of the old veteran UFO researchers in New Zealand who were former New Zealand Air Force, the rumor has always been around that after our famous Kaikoura Lights sightings took place, an emissary from the States arrived and briefed the MOD and government. Now, that's a rumor, but it's been a very persistent one. So, it would be nice to know if that is true. But given the fact that when the MOD released the files, they made the public statement that they believe that UFOs could be explained, all UFOs that people report can be explained by misidentified aircraft or natural phenomena. So I intend to ask them fairly soon, have they changed their stance on that, given all of the stuff that's coming out of the States now, or do they still consider that it's all strange clouds and misidentified aircraft?
Yeah,
We have such a rich history. We go back to, I think it's 1869 or something like that, was the earliest sighting of what we would class as a UFO in New Zealand, made by a British colonel who was over here with the British Army, and he was with a whole company of our Indigenous people, Māori, and they saw this thing come down over the water and up a ridge line and disappear. And the Māori believed that it must be some kind of god, and the colonel couldn't explain what on earth it was, but it has all the characteristics of an acute turn, just stopping and then going back up the ridge line. It has the characteristics of a UFO. So we have this massive history of UFO sightings being documented in New Zealand, with landings, with people seeing the craft and the entities, all kinds of different craft. So it's very interesting, and I'm hoping that New Zealand Archives will one day accept my massive archive and keep it as a piece of New Zealand history.
Man, and it takes people like you, people who are willing to take action to kind of stay on the case and to stay on, because a lot of people would just look, okay, that's all that was in the report, and kind of just walk away and not really hold them accountable for what they should be doing, which is collecting data. But just like you mentioned, their statement of uh, these can be explained by civilian craft, or this is the classic line that it probably was fed to them by our government here in the United States. I wouldn't doubt it, because I think the U.S. government has a stranglehold on most countries, and it is proven. Really, there's so many different cases of where they just have shown up, another country, just showing up into your country and taking over these duties. Like, how do you do that? But
yeah, well, recently an Italian sighting has come to light. I'm on the executive board of ISA, the International Coalition for Extraterrestrial Research, and our president is actually the president also of CUN, which is the Italian UFO research group. And a sighting has come to light, I think it's 1953 or 33. I'm sorry, I don't know the exact date, but it is, it must be 33 or 35, because it predates the Kenneth Arnold sighting in the States. So they're very proud at the moment that Italy is the home of the first sightings, but of a craft that apparently crashed and was retrieved by the Americans. So we do have this long reach of the USA into many different countries.
Yeah, and so and so you can imagine, right, what we have to deal with here, just trying to get answers, because not only are their hands in our pot right here with the Roswells and the things that have happened here on our land, but they have had their hands in everything else, and it appears to be like a global thing. But with that being said, yeah, I mean, it's just when it comes down to it, a term that has been thrown around lately has been controlled disclosure versus catastrophic disclosure,
Yeah.
if you've heard those terms. And the governments, all powers that be, my belief is that they all prefer the controlled route, because it's something that they're able to, like you said, you think disclosure, especially coming using that method won't be anytime soon. 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 100 more years probably, if even that. Versus the catastrophic disclosure, which is what I'm more into and what I would like to see, and not necessarily using the term catastrophic, just more of direct disclosure. And that happens with a lot of the things you talked about, with, us kind of getting together and trying to bring this in. And I'm under the same belief too. How do you feel about, what do you think is going to, so if this were something you could choose today, you could push a button that says controlled or catastrophic, and it happens immediately, which one do you push?
I would push controlled, but not perhaps for the reasons that perhaps the American government is doing it, for different reasons. I think if you look at if I look at some of the experiences I'm working with at the moment, there's real mixed feelings about their experiences, and it's turned their life upside down in some respects and not in others. But it still creates what would you call it? A barrier in their life that they have to kind of work around until it's not a barrier anymore. So it's like trying to get through a door that's shut and you can't quite get it open. When you get it open, then you can walk through, but until you're ready to get it open, you can't. And I remember years ago, just finishing what I was saying there. So if you had a catastrophic disclosure, you've got a lot of people who've never even thought about UFOs or aliens.
Right.
And there's millions of people on this planet who probably never think about them.
True.
And what happens to their world, their worldview, and their life is somehow shattered. They feel like the terror. And then there's other people who've been following the subject and they're like, yeah, we're ready for this. But we're at all these stages of readiness, and that's what the ETs have said. Everything revolves around mass readiness. They've said that many times to groups of humans I've been in, that this isn't about the readiness of small groups. This is about a general readiness. So the 100th monkey thing, where you talk about it for years and then suddenly it becomes normal. And it never used to be, but suddenly it's accepted and it's normal. And there might be a few people who haven't cottoned on yet, but the majority have. So we haven't reached that point at all. And so I know that the ETs have said, again, there's a chapter in my book about it, where they talk about how this unfolding of disclosure, it has to be slow. And there's all sorts of reasons why it has to be slow so as not to destroy our civilization. I have people who are deeply religious and Christian who come to me and say they've had a sighting and they're terrified because it goes against, they don't really want to talk to me because I'm the enemy, but they don't know who else to talk to about it. They've talked to maybe the church, and the church has said that's evil. And they are then terrified more because the church is telling them they're dealing with something evil. So what's wrong with them? There are all these things going on in their mind. They come and talk to me, and I point them in different directions and discuss it with them, and so that bring them to a point of where they're comfortable with it again, comfortable with themselves above anything, let alone the subject. So, you put that on a mass scale, you've got problems. And it's interesting to note that this whole spirituality thing versus religion thing is also coming to a head, because I've got some personal friends now through my travels. I have met some church ministers, one in particular in the UK, but there's one in Australia, and others who have decided that they want to look into this subject. They don't think that the people who come to them from their parishioners and their church members to talk to them about these things, they don't think those people are evil or what they're dealing with is necessarily evil. They want to understand it. And I had a British vicar, who's now a very good friend of mine, fly up to Norway to meet me and hear me speak. And we communicate a lot because this is a new movement that's happening within religion, that there is coming to be an acceptance of other forms of life that might exist beyond our planet. So if we have a catastrophic disclosure and people are not ready for it, then we're opening a really big can of worms. So there's the positive and the negative side to slow disclosure, and catastrophic disclosure could be extremely damaging to humanity.
I agree. I do agree. And I do totally get the implications of potentially what catastrophic disclosure could bring to the table is definitely could not be pretty. But here's the thing that I fight against is that just like we talked about earlier, a controlled disclosure is obviously something that we already understand is going to be over a time period. Now, when we talk about the current state of the world that we're in, and we talk about running out of time, then how can we stick with the controlled disclosure path if we are also running out of time based on how things are now? Because with the controlled disclosure, it doesn't change the powers that be in their want and need to go to war and to develop these newer weapons that may be. We already have the weapon right now that would take everything out, which is a nuclear weapon. And so controlled disclosure just gives those powers to be time to decide if they want to use it or not. And what happens if they use it before we see this controlled disclosure path through? That's the issue that I have. So I would rather gamble on, because for sure we're heading down a path where we may annihilate ourselves right now as we speak. So taking the risk of a catastrophic disclosure where certain people are ready, some people may not be, but maybe we can help those people through this process, I think is at least a way that we can get to where we need to go and avoid this horrible thing that we know could be tomorrow. They could hit the button on nuclear war tomorrow, and
Yeah.
controlled disclosure is out the window.
Well, Rob, I think we have to take into consideration numerous factors that you haven't mentioned. The ETs, for example, the Greys said that if we are kind of dragging our feet on this whole spirituality thing, and there's too many people who are saying no, this is just all nonsense, it doesn't exist. They said that they are going to begin increasing sightings. So it's very dead. It's very dead at the moment because they are watching, they are observing, and they are monitoring.
Great.
But if we start going even slightly down a track that they are hoping we're not going to go down, then they will start to increase sightings. And this is one way of bringing the general public into the subject. Now, most people who come to me who've had a sighting, they're not if they saw an alien, they might go out of their tree. It's a step too far. They see a light in the sky doing something unusual. They see a dark triangular shape or a cigar-shaped thing go across the sky. It's like, wow, I've seen a UFO. And so this whole idea of disclosure by the ETs is the next possibility that we haven't actually addressed tonight. Yeah. And so they said, we will speed up that. First of all, it'll be seeing a craft in the sky, a light in the sky more frequently, really frequently. Then it'll be an actual craft in the sky for a period of time. And then it will be, people will see a landed craft with the entities nearby it. And it'll get to the point where it becomes undeniable, where this 100th monkey thing happens, where there's so many sightings taking place that people start to get nervous about what it's all about. And the other thing that can happen that we need to take into consideration is the big earth changes, the dramatic changes in our weather. We're getting severe weather and flooding and all sorts of things that threaten our existence and threaten many people's lives. So when we hit a rock bottom point, and we're all scrabbling in the mud, and we're trying to survive, as many people in New Zealand did earlier this year when we had massive flooding that probably didn't reach your TV screens. Then, you know, you start examining your world differently. You start examining how, when you get back on your feet, you want to live your life. You start self-questioning, not that you're the blame for it all, but you don't want to go through something like that again. You want something better, and you start looking at all the things in society that you've never really been happy with, and you want them to change. So there are lots of triggers and lots of precedents for change in people's intent and change in people's mindsets and worldviews. And if you get a number of these things happening at once, that's when you get really worn down. You get hordes of people traveling across Europe or South America trying to find somewhere to go to escape a particular regime in their country or whatever. You get people pouring out of Africa and going up through Italy and Greece and the other countries and right as far as Scandinavia looking for somewhere to live. And then you get the earth changes happening at the same time. You get food shortages and severe weather. And soon you've got a civilization that's worn down. And then they start seeing lights in the sky, and things start to open up in their mind and change. So the ETs have said that there will be this rough period, and then after that there'll be what they call the time of examination, where the cards will be put on the table, and by then everybody will realize that this is what has to be done. And the only thing that can bring you to that point is some kind of massive calamity that affects many people. And this sounds quite negative, but hey, people, I was taken on board a craft 2 months before certain things happened, and they showed us what they were doing to prepare as many people as possible in an altered state. They were bringing hundreds of people on board these massive craft, preparing them. They wouldn't tell us what was coming up. For obvious reasons. We go shouting it from the rooftops and do silly things that are not good interventions. So they were talking to the people who they knew were going to lose their lives in these calamities, and they were saying, please come back to us when you leave your body. Come to us, go through a learning process so we can help you get back down on the planet when things are cleaned up and you can have a good positive influence. And this included scientists and all kinds of people, from engineers to you name it. And after that, we had the Japanese tsunami and another calamity, which I've listed in my book. There was a whole series of massive calamities where there was huge loss of life. And I know that what they were illustrating to us and showing us, and why they were bringing people on board craft, was to prepare them for that. And there's the spiritual side of it, that we need to consider that there are species out there that humans are having contact with who have our well-being at heart. And, someone said to me recently about a person who had been getting some care and didn't really appreciate it. And they said, sometimes when you end up doing more for someone to help someone than they're doing to help themselves, it becomes an impossible situation. And that's where we are now. They are doing a great deal to help us, but what are we actually doing to help ourselves? Of course, there are some wonderful things being done in science and the humanities and that, but it's not enough. It's not enough, and there's not enough people on board. And only a sudden shock or a sudden revelation that shocks people, or a series of calamitous events, can bring us to that point where we want something different and we are willing to change to get it.
Wow, Susie, I have totally enjoyed engaging with you. Someone with so much experience in actually researching and touching different parts of this field, and being able to pick your brain. It's been awesome, especially when we know the powers that be did want us to have this conversation today. They tried to shut it down, and we still made it through. So what I would like to do, I think we definitely pulled it together pretty good, but I would like to do this without the hiccup. So I'd like to continue this conversation at some point pretty soon here. If you wouldn't mind, we can sit up and arrange something. But once again, I really appreciate all the time that you spent, the years that you have spent in cataloging and researching, because the knowledge that you have from your experience is invaluable, and it's something that we need to be able to lean on more people who have dedicated themselves like that. So I just wanted to say that, and then also, if you wouldn't mind letting everybody know where they can find you and your work.
Okay, I have two websites. It's ufocusnz.org.nz is my sightings website. It is still we've got a new website, so you have to be patient. We're still loading stuff onto it. I have one for experiencers called communicatorlink.com. You can contact me through there, and the three colleagues I work with, you can contact us through there. My book is for sale on Amazon and Barnes and Noble. And if you Google my name, Suzy Hansen UFO, you'll probably find my speeches in it. I've got a Facebook page, Suzy Hansen, and I've got a Suzanne Hansen YouTube channel, which needs updating, but I don't have time.
Yeah, I did go over and check it out. You do have a lot of videos over there too, so definitely you guys go over there. The information is in the description of this video, so you guys can go into the description and take down all the information. Once again, Susie, thank you so much for being just a patient soul, and thank you for everything that you're doing. And I'm going to be reaching out to you soon, so we can figure this thing out and reconnect and do this flawlessly next time, and continue enlightening people out here like we need to do anyways.
Thank you, Rob. It's been lovely talking with you, and I hope your listeners have enjoyed it. Thanks, and I'll be
Oh, they
happy to
have.
come back again.
All right. Well, we'll talk very, very soon, within the next day or two. Thank you so much, Susie. You have a great rest of your day, and you take care.
Thank you, and the same to you.
Bye bye.
Bye.
All right, guys, it's some awesome stuff going on here. They tried to stop us. They tried to step in front of what it is that we wanted to do today, and guess what? We still got it done. So I do appreciate everyone who stuck with us tonight as we tried to overcome the technical difficulties that we had earlier. So for anyone watching this later, that's why this show is 2 hours versus three. Is but you would never know by the way we pulled this thing off. So I do appreciate everyone who kind of came in. Says Sovereign says, yeah, we'll have it in the beginning. I'll just tell you now because all the other videos are deleted, so you'll just be wondering forever. Um, the website that we use to do streaming completely crashed in the middle of our interview. Crashed, wouldn't let us back in, gave us links that didn't work, and we overcame that, and we still enlightened some souls out there. So I definitely appreciate everybody sticking in. You knew we weren't going to call it quits until we had that conversation. However, my guy Travis Mustos, we will see you next week. I've already reached out to Travis. He was normally coming in for hour 3, but we needed to give that full time to our guest tonight. So we're going to be doing it. We're going to, man, Luvera Lucchini. I like, no worries. Rob G was worth it. Love it. Tamat, man, that was great. This is what I'm talking about. Christine, great interview, Rob G. Thank you very much. Ange, oh my God, I enjoyed this show so much. Thanks, Rob G. I'm just here doing a job, and the job is to reach people and kind of try to move this needle. We did it tonight. So I definitely want to thank you guys for sticking with it, and that's what it's all about. So with that being said, let's go ahead and take a look at our super chatters tonight. We did have a few. We had welcome to the show. Definitely want to thank you for your contribution to Spaced Out Radio. We appreciate you. T-Bone came in and dropped a note on us here. If I could bring him up. This one. Okay, well, okay, there we go. CS gave us one. And then T-Bone, this website is still acting up. So with that being said, you're already a space traveler, guys. Go ahead and take the extra step. Join the Space Travelers Club for as little as $5 per month at our Patreon. And to all our viewers across the globe, thank you so much for tuning your frequency and sticking with Spaced Out Radio tonight as we did and do what we do best. Problem came up. We owned the night again. Have a great rest of your night. Dave's got to be up tomorrow. And who is he having? He is having, let me go ahead and tell you who Dave is having tomorrow. I know who it is, but it's on the tip of my tongue. Let me do Dave decide, even though there's no need for it because you know to come watch Dave tomorrow, but he is having Matt Ford. So make sure you're here tomorrow to see Matt Ford and Dave Scott. Dave will be conducting the Woo Train Monday through Friday, and then I will see you guys right back here next Saturday. Thank you guys for coming and joining After Hours. Have a great rest of your night because we own the night. We owned it. You guys take care.
Stay healthy, my friend.
You too.
You need bail money, give me a call.
Always, Dad. Take care.
You too.